Alrighty, hi everyone and welcome. It looks like we are officially live. It's so great to virtually see everyone trickling into today's program. So hello and welcome. It is 11 o'clock on the dot over here in Santa Cruz, California. However, we will give folks about another 30 seconds to join the live stream and get settled in before we officially get started. We really don't have any time to waste. We have a great program lined up. But as we are waiting for our last few folks to come in and join us, if you are watching live today, please go ahead and say hi in the live chat, introduce yourself, say where you're watching from, and we can even give you a shout out during today's conversation. So, hello and welcome everyone. It's so great to see you all. Awesome. So it looks like we are about a minute past 11 o'clock over here. And let's go ahead and officially get started. Like I said earlier, there's really no time to waste in today's program. So hi everyone, and welcome to a Labside Chat with the Seymour Marine Discovery Center. My name is Jen, and I will be your host for today's program. If you have watched a Labside Chat before, welcome back. We're so excited that you're here today. But if this is the first time you are tuning in for a program like this, welcome. We love to see new faces, or I guess I should say new names joining us on the YouTube live stream. But today's program is an opportunity to have a conversation or Q&A dialogue with a scientist from UC Santa Cruz to really talk about how scientific research plays a role in the understanding and conservation of the world's oceans. So I am not joined by just any scientist today. I am joined by the all wonderful Dr. Luis Huckstadt. And Dr. Luis Huckstadt is an assistant professor here at, assistant researcher here at the Institute of Marine Sciences at UC Santa Cruz, as well as an adjunct professor at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. Luis is also originally from Chile, but we are so grateful that he is here at UC Santa Cruz and sharing his expertise with us. And not only are we going to be chatting and asking questions to Luis today, but we're also going to be talking all about marine predators, how to study them, where they live in the ocean, and just exactly what role they play in the ecosystem, which I'm assuming is a pretty important one. So, Luis, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited about this chat today.
Yeah, definitely. And, I just can't say thank you enough for sharing a portion of your morning with us and talking about science and all the cool things that you're able to do. But I have to say, I don't think it's morning where you are. So where are you?
I'm actually in Wilmington, in North Carolina, so it's 2 o'clock for me.
Nice. So tuning in, or I guess joining us all the way from the East Coast. So again, thank you so much for being here. We're really excited. And I actually have a lot of questions lined up for you that were all submitted in advance by community members. And they're some really, really great ones. So I hope we have enough time to talk and answer all of these wonderful questions that were submitted. But for any of you that are watching at home that were not able to submit a question in advance for today's conversation, not to worry. Please go ahead and put your questions in the YouTube live chat feature, and we'll be able to answer those as well. All right. Luis, are you ready for the community questions?
As ready as I'm ever going to be.
Okay, awesome. So when I say that you study marine predators, what does that mean? Like, what type of animals are we talking about? Are we talking about fish? Are we talking about sharks? Are we talking about, I don't know, different types of invertebrates, right? Because things like to eat each other in the ocean. But marine predators, what are we talking about in terms of your research?
So marine predators are basically those animals that are sitting at the sort of the top of the trophic webs in the ocean. Those that includes, of course, fish and sharks and marine mammals and seabirds. In my particular case, I specialize mostly in marine mammals. So I work a lot with pinnipeds, so seals and sea lions. That's where most of my research takes place. But I've also worked a little bit with cetaceans, with whales, and I've also worked with penguins as well. So when I'm talking about marine predators, I'm actually talking about air-breathing marine predators. So the only ones of that group that I haven't ever worked with are marine reptiles, but I've worked with seabirds and I've worked with marine mammals.
Yeah. And where in the world are you doing this research? Are you, out on the East Coast where you are now? Are you out here on the West Coast? Are you in different exotic parts of the world? Where are you able to study these different marine predators?
All over the place. So I started to get involved with marine mammal research when I was doing my undergrad back in Chile. And back then I was working on the interaction between fisheries and marine mammals. It's a big deal basically for fishing nations because marine mammals tend to learn that fishing activity means free food. So I was studying that. Then I came to the States to the Coastal Lab in the EEB department and I to do my PhD. And once I started doing my PhD, my original plan was actually keep going with the sea lions in Chile, but we have my life sort of took a detour for the better, and I ended up working in Antarctica. So my dissertation was working with southern elephant seals and crab eater seals in Antarctica, and that's actually where I do most of my research. Like right now, I've been going to Antarctica since 2007. I can't remember how many times. It's close to 10 times that I've been done there. And I've also had the amazing opportunity as a grad student, as a postdoc at UC Santa Cruz to work in California, in Mexico, in Galapagos, in Uruguay, and in Chile. So I've been doing field work with marine mammals, especially pinnipeds, all over the place, pretty much.
Yeah. That sounds really exciting that science can take you all over the world. But I'm really interested in Antarctica because that is a place where not a lot of people get to go unless you're really, really lucky, like yourself, and you're pursuing this research. So how do you get to that part of the world? Because to me, it seems so remote and just a almost impossible place to get to. So how can you explain a little bit about the journey that you have to take to get to Antarctica?
It depends on where you're going. As it is pretty remote, but there's basically two main ways that scientists get to the Antarctic continent. The first one is by boat. So we've done that when we were doing work along the Antarctic Peninsula, which is that arm that sort of extends from the Antarctic continent over South America. In order to go there, we basically fly to Chile, as far south as you can get to Punta Arenas, get on a boat, cross the Drake Passage, which is in itself a very, for some people, traumatic experience because it's one of the worst seas in the world. And then once you get to Antarctica, you can go to the stations that are down there, the camps, or you can work from the ship itself. So that's one of the things if you're working in that area. The other way that a lot of people do for the larger stations is that you can fly. So the other sort of sector of Antarctica where I work a lot is the Ross Sea, which is directly south from New Zealand. So what we do is that we fly from LA usually to Christchurch in New Zealand. And then from New Zealand, we got on a C-17, so these huge military planes, and fly to Antarctica, which takes about 5 hours, that flight. You used to land on what was a runway that was built on sea ice, frozen ocean, basically. They now switched to a more permanent runway, but it's still on an ice shelf. So you're literally landing on ice. And that takes about 5 hours. If you get on another plane, it can take up to 8 hours of doing that. So it can be intense. It's not as comfortable. You're not flying business when you're going to Antarctica.
Yeah, so it sounds like you also have to maybe have a strong stomach and a lot of patience to get to these locations.
Yeah, and there's no toilet, so you gotta hold it. It's not a fun thing to do, but it's more than worth it when you step out of the plane and you're in Antarctica. You forget about all those little details.
Yeah, can you tell me what it was like the first time you went there and you stepped off the plane or the boat? Like, what was your first experience?
So the first time was a little bit more gradual because I went on the ship. So you are already very far south and you're going through the Drake, and once you get to Antarctica, things get colder and colder, but not too bad. Mm-hmm. But the first time that I stepped out of the plane in McMurdo was shocking because it was minus 42 degrees Fahrenheit. And I remember taking my first breath of cold air in Antarctica and feeling the inside of my lungs and my trachea freezing over. And automatically I was like, I'm not gonna do this. I'm gonna get back. But you get used to it, of course, and then hopefully the temperature warms up a little bit more, and then you can actually work and breathe and do the stuff that you have to do. And also for the fieldwork experience, because we work with liquids and stuff that we use to take samples from the animals, you cannot work when it's that cold. So you never actually are outside of a building when it gets to those temperatures. So it was just that first experience, that first step out of the plane, that was very traumatic to me.
Gotcha. And so it takes a long time to get there, seems pretty difficult to get there. And so I have to imagine the animals that live there might be hard to study too if we're going along with this theme. And so when you're down there in Antarctica, can you remind me what type of animals you are specifically working with and exactly how you do that?
So there's several different species of pinnipeds right there. So there's 4 truly Antarctic seals, true seals, the crab-eater seals, the leopard seal, the Ross seal, and the Weddell seal. There's a subantarctic seal, if you will, that is the elephant seal, the southern elephant seal. And then there's the Antarctic fur seal, which is a relative of the sea lions. So I work with all of those species except for the Ross seal. And each one of them lives in a different environment. So the most difficult to work with, if you think about it a little bit, are the crab-eater seals and the leopard seal, because they live in what we call the pack ice. So it's basically this frozen ocean that breaks up into flows, and they live in those flows. So they use those to hold out. So getting to where they are, you have to take a little Zodiac boat from your big boat. Basically, you get into a small inflatable Zodiac, get to the animal, and you have to sort of get that animal in that flow. And sometimes it can be very unstable and whatnot. So that makes things a little bit trickier, a little bit more complicated, but also a little bit more exciting because you go through your adrenaline rush. And then the Weddell seal, sorry, the population that we work with is probably the best known population of any marine mammal. They've been studying the same population since the 60s. And the good thing is that it's really close to the largest station on the Antarctic continent, which is McMurdo Station. And because we are as far south as you can get by ocean, the entire ocean is frozen solid. So you can literally drive on the ocean, on the frozen ocean. So we go in the snow machines or some snow adapted vehicles to get to the animals. We get to the animals, do our whatever we're going to be doing, and go back to station, take a hot shower, go to the cafe because there's a coffee shop in the station. So it's a little more spoiled the situation when you go to McMurdo.
Yeah, it sounds like a really awesome field day. Like that sounds really, really incredible. And so when you're working with these animals, what are the types of questions you are trying to answer with your research?
So the big question that I'm interested in is trying to understand what, as you say, what the role is for these species. What is their function in their ecosystem? The problem is that we don't really quite understand how they function at an individual level, and we need to do that in order to understand what their role in the ecosystem is. So historically, people haven't been paying too much attention to all these species, and it's very likely that this happened because humans exploited all of these populations almost to extinction. So by the time that we were starting to gather knowledge about how the oceans work, all of these species were virtually absent. So no one was paying attention to these species. But as you know, several of them have made a comeback. So think about the California sea lions, the northern elephant seals. All of these species were hunted, were pretty much gone. The humpback whales, for example, and now they're making a comeback. And we don't understand what their role is in the ecosystem. So my research goes towards using technologies that allowed us to understand how they eat, where they find food, how they distribute in the ocean, what kind of habitat they utilize, how much they eat, etc. So hopefully by doing that, we'll get a better view of where in the ecosystem they fit and what their function is.
Yeah, that's awesome. And with these tags that you're using, are you just tracking where these animals are swimming in the ocean, or are these tags able to collect additional data from their environment?
So the world of biologging, that's what that branch of science is called, putting instruments on animal, has developed a lot. So one of the first things that we did was the, the, the first obvious question was, where do they dive? How deep they dive? How long they dive? Then as the technology sort of started advancing, we were able to answer that kind of questions. Where do they go now? Using satellites, we can actually follow these animals as they move in the ocean. Now we actually understood that because these animals are using areas of the ocean that are important ecologically, we can put an instrument on these animals that actually can measure temperature and salinity or chlorophyll content of the water column. So we can use them as what we call oceanographers. So these animals are sampling the ocean for us, so we can give those data to the oceanographic community, the climate scientists, and they can understand whether warming is happening, how much warming is happening, how fast it's happening, etc. So there's a whole advantage of not only doing the research because it's going to tell us something about the ecology of the animals, but also we actually are gathering data about the ocean of the status of the ocean. I'm sorry. And there's newer technologies that allowed us to measure physiological variables. So accelerometer, for example, you can measure, it's like having your own Apple Watch or your own Fitbit in an animal. You can measure how much energy they spend, how fast they swim, etc. So yeah, the world of biology is one of the most fascinating right now, and there's so much application, so many different applications for that kind of science.
Definitely. It sounds like you're killing two birds with one stone, where you're gathering all this information about the animal, but you're also gathering all this information about the ocean and its surrounding environment. So that's really
Yeah,
cool.
absolutely. And it's a win-win situation for everybody.
Yeah, definitely. So we got a really great question from Jessica, who asked about different marine predators in the ocean. So she asked if you have noticed any differences in an ecosystem where sharks tend to dominate versus when marine mammals tend to dominate.
So there's been a lot of data, mostly anecdotal lately, about something like that. One of the examples, I've been reading a lot about how the great white sharks are gone from South Africa. So it was even a huge tourist attraction because there's in South Africa there's this massive colonies of Cape fur seals, a species of kind of a sea lion that lives in those areas, and great white sharks used to go and eat them, but now they're gone. The sharks are gone, and no one understands why. Um, on the East Coast, one of the things that is happening now is that because of the protection that the Marine Mammal Protection Act puts towards marine mammals, the seals colonies are increasing. So harbor seals and gray seal colony numbers are going up, and there has been an increase in the sightings of great white sharks in this area. So there's a lot of that in California itself. We haven't. California, as you know, it's a hotspot for great white sharks. There's a lot of seals for them to eat. But what we have seen is sort of a shift in where the great whites are sort of focusing their foraging. So a couple of years ago, even decades ago, the Farallon Islands were the hotspot for great white sharks. The last couple of years, it looks like Año Nuevo, where these elephant seals are, might be the new hotspot for great white sharks. So it's a very dynamic picture of what's happening with the shark seal populations all over the world, and we don't quite understand what's happening yet. We don't have the information to have a clear view, have a clear hypothesis of what's going on.
Yeah. So Jessica, if you're watching, that might be a good project to pursue through further graduate school and thesis work. So that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for answering that. I also got a quick question from one of our community members who submitted this in advance, asking if you always wanted to work with these big marine mammals, and what your pathway was to working with these marine predators.
I was one of those weirdo kids that by the time that I was 9, I wanted to work with marine mammals. Mm-hmm. All I wanted to do, and back in the day, I didn't know what a marine biologist was or a marine ecologist. So in my mind, I wanted to be either a veterinarian or a zoologist. And that's it. I just wanted to work with marine mammals. In particular, I wanted to work with dolphins and whales, of course. But through my career, you realize that there's only so much thing that you can do with these kind of animals, because capturing and working with them is very hard. Whereas pinnipeds fulfill a really special role because they have to come to land. It's easier for us to work with them, and their contribution to science goes beyond the knowledge that we gain about the species themselves. We can use pinnipeds as model species to understand, for example, how whales will react to climate change. So it's a really win-win situation again. But yeah, it was when I was about 9 years old, I decided I wanted to be a marine biologist. I went to college. I graduated in marine biology. I did my master's in marine in oceanography, and I came to the States to do my PhD to work with Dan Costa because I was going to work with marine mammals. That's it.
Yeah. So you had your mind made up from the get-go, it sounds like, and you really pursued your passion.
Yeah, and I don't understand why, because I used to live in Caracas, the capital city of Venezuela, not close to the ocean. I never had any exposure to marine mammals. I saw probably dolphins on TV, and that's it. But somehow I just knew that marine mammals was my way to go.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we're super happy that you're here and studying what you do. Alrighty, so we have only a few minutes left, and I have a lot more questions to ask you. So in addition to the tagging technology that you are using on these different types of animals, we got a question asking if you use any other different types of samples to learn more about these animals. So if you take weights or blood samples or blubber samples, whisker samples, whatever, what other things do you look at when you are studying these animals, particularly down in Antarctica?
Pretty much everything. So one of the things that we are very conscientious about is that if we are going to handle an animal for science, we got to make sure that we cover all the aspects about the science that can be possible. So we collect samples, not only thinking about our particular question, but also about all the other stuff that we can learn from that animal. So you sort of owe that to that animal because you're making that animal go through a little bit of a troubling time, right? So you might as well just collect as much information as you can. In particular, one of the things that I really like to work with, and I've been working a lot with, is the stable isotopes, which is basically this tracer. It's a way to figure it out how energy and matter flow through the ecosystem. So you have this sort of tracer, so this sort of label in molecules, biological molecules, that you can trace the origin from the primary producer, from the plants of the ocean, the phytoplankton, all the way up to the very top of the trophic web. So you can use those to reconstruct diet, for example, or even look into movement patterns, etc. And the good thing about that kind of studies is that it doesn't matter what kind of tissue you're going to get from the animal, what kind of sample, you're always going to have information. That's something that I've been doing a lot, and is one of the ways that I've been able, for example, just to do studies on historical ecology, see how the ecology of Weddell seals, for example, has changed over the last century, because we've been able to gather data or collect samples from museums and animals that were killed 100 years ago and compare those today based on a stable isotope. So it's a fascinating world that is it's so fulfilling because you always get interesting data and good information about the ecology and physiology of the animals as well.
Yeah, so stable isotopes. Who knew how much information this could hold? So that's really cool. I have two more questions left, and I was hoping that you could share one of the most surprising or fascinating things that you have learned from studying these animals.
There's a lot of really cool stuff, right? So the first thing, I guess, is not actually from my research. It's not even from pinnipeds, but just last month or 2 months ago, they published the data for the longest dive for a big whale that was taken sort of, I'm in North Carolina right now, so a little bit north of here in the Beaufort area, and it was close to 4 hours. So whenever we talk about elephant seals and how they dive, the diving behavior, we always like to brag about the fact that elephant seals can dive over 2 hours. But then the cetacean comes and dives for 4 hours, and it blows it blows all the records, and it's amazing. So you just gotta think about the fact that these animals, when they're exercising, when they're chasing their prey, they're holding their breath. So try to run while holding your breath. You're gonna die, right? These animals, they do that on a regular basis. Every 20 minutes, they're diving, holding their breath, and chasing prey. And they have an amazing physiology that allows it to do all these incredible things that I mean, how can you not be impressed with all the things that they do?
Right. Yeah. And we can learn so much from these marine predators as well. And it's so cool just to hear what you are finding and to hear what other research is out there too. So my last question that I want to ask you, that I ask every single scientist that comes onto this program, is what is your favorite part of your job?
So you would think that it's traveling, because I've traveled all over the place, but actually what I enjoy the most by far is working with the animals. Working with the animals has been such a rewarding experience. It's one thing that I didn't experience when I was doing my master's or my undergrad. I started working with animals here in Santa Cruz, and I wouldn't change that for the world. It's by far one of the most incredible things, being so close to animals that you only see in a documentary narrated by David Attenborough, and you figured it out that you're in the same place and you actually can learn from these animals, is by far the best thing about my career.
Yeah, well, awesome. Thank you so much, Luis. It was such a pleasure to talk to you and learn more about your research, especially your travels to Antarctica and the different pinnipeds that you worked with. I always find that so fascinating. So thank you so much for sharing your experience.
Thank you for having me. It was a great experience today.
Yeah, and I know that people will probably have more questions for you, including me. I know I could talk to you probably for the next 2 hours about pinnipeds and whales, and we didn't even get to talk about penguins. So do you have a place online or a website where folks can go to learn more about you and your research?
Yeah, you can visit my website. It's www.luishuckstadt.com. So it's basically my name. And also on Twitter, you can follow me on @LuisHuckstadt. And just so you know, I have every Monday, I provide a pinniped fact. So if you follow me every Monday, you learn something about pinnipeds if you follow me on Twitter.
Oh, I love that. Pinniped Mondays. So yeah, make sure to follow you on Twitter. I also just dropped those links in the YouTube live chat so folks can go ahead and click on those. They will also be added to the video description after we wrap up our conversation here. But thank you so much for sharing that. And I also want to send a big thank you to everyone who tuned in for today's program. I know I say this a lot because it's true. It's really supporters like you that make these online programs possible. So I also see that Katie joined us today, a former front deskie. So Katie, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. So if you're in the position and want to see these programs continue and we can continue to bring you scientists that work behind the scenes, please consider either making a donation or becoming a member with the Seymour Center to continue to support these efforts. So you can find more information on the Seymour Center's website, which is seymourcenter.ucsc.edu, or you can click on the video, or click on the links in the video description below. It's really, I just can't say this enough, but the supporters like you all out there are the reason why the Seymour Center is able to do the things that we do. So thank you again for joining us, and we will see you for the next live program. Thanks, everyone.